like to ask you about types.
Yeah.
And looking at the Acqual model, I found maybe it's the bit that gets the least attention somehow, or at least I haven't found a lot or as much as the other aspects. And I just wondered if you could give me a bigger sense of what types are all about, why they were included.
Yeah.
Are they sort of the place where all the other patterns go?
Yes, it is a great garbage bin. They all go there to die. Did y'all hear that? Sort of, it's basically about types and what that means. Also keep in mind that the 5 Acqual elements are just 5 most important. And you certainly can include others. But types is, well, the 5 are the minimum that we feel that you really need to touch bases with. And at least think about those if you want to be integral. Because we're finding people usually leave out 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of these. But types are things, one of the simplest is, most people are familiar with, let's say, Myers-Briggs as a typology. It's certainly extremely popular in business. And there are, again, 2 ways you can use types. One is types on this side, how it applies to you. And the other is types on the other side, whether you're approaching other individuals, what type are they, or whether you're approaching environmental situation, what type of a situation are you working with here? What type ecosystems, what type weather systems, what type evolutionary currents, and so on. Types can be very important in terms of if you want to micro tweak your approach to particular individuals, and also perhaps yourself. Some people find that the Enneagram is extremely useful. And I don't know how many, any of you use that at all? You find about a third, maybe fourth? And so what that is, particularly the one, I'm fond of the one that Helen Palmer does, only because it's based a little bit on some empirical research. But any of them that have a fair amount of success and are respected can be used. And the idea is that you can, in addition to saying, okay, this person is at this altitude, which is fine, to know that somebody's at a particular altitude of development, and they might be at Orange, for example, is really not to say much else. And there are all sorts of people at Orange. And so beyond that, you might want to say, well, I want to, to sort of narrow down the skillful means that I need in order to approach somebody who's flying at that altitude. And so that's one of the things that types are about, is you can go in and say, well, this person is on the Enneagram, this person is a 5, this person is a 3, etc. And it can, for some people, they find it very, very, very helpful. A lot of people, and this is a classic example, if you can use the Acqual framework any way you want to, but there are some ways that I'm not comfortable with, and I wouldn't do it. But if other people want to, that's fine. And that is, a lot of people use it for astrology. And so you can be whatever your particular sign might be, at whatever altitude. You can also combine that with Enneagram and so on. So types are really, a lot of people use it quite extensively. Also when it comes to psychotherapy, there are a lot of people that use, we're just starting this part of it now, but last I saw we had about a dozen typologies and tests that we were using for that. And psychotherapists find them very, very useful. We'll be online with all of those and make those available. And you'd be surprised the amount of work that's been done on those. And we have typologies in all 4 quadrants. Yeah. Sure. In the upper right, there are typologies that deal with micro, meso, small, medium, and large for the upper right. And so there's types in, again, I use psychotherapy since we brought it up, but there are types of, it would be classified as mental illnesses with typologies based on brain chemistry imbalances. So there's a whole series of those. And increasingly, there's this big drive to reduce all of psychology and psychotherapy to upper right. It's just basically a brain chemistry imbalance. But I think that's so important that there often is chemistry imbalance, and fixing that can help enormously. But it doesn't change one whit the type of thoughts you have. You can have absolutely, false, negative, stupid thoughts, and take Prozac, and then you're relaxed, false, stupid in your thought. It doesn't change that. You don't pop up one morning and go, hey, I understand hermeneutics. It just doesn't work like that at all. So you still have to do both. You still have to have your own understanding in the left-hand approaches, in addition to whatever tinkering you do with the actual physical, gross cellular causal, physical, in the upper right. In the lower right, there are types of structures, techno-economic structures that you find yourself in, and even though you have sort of developmental sequences, any developmental sequence can also be a topology. So you can use spiral dynamics also as a typology. You can say that person is predominantly red type. And that's fairly common as well. In the lower right, we look at everything from techno-economic modes and to, if you really get down to types of practices in the lower right, it's frighteningly similar. And this is one of the things that got Marx onto his ideas. Probably the best person working with it now is Gerhard Linsky, and he's one of the main ones that we work with. But if you take, Linsky incidentally was the person who introduced the now almost universally accepted scheme of foraging, horticultural, agrarian, industrial, informational, with maritime, herding, oceanic subtypes. If you look at those, and if you take, let's say, horticultural is different from agrarian. They're both farming. But horticultural is farming that you can do with a little digging stick or a hoe, or a hoe. And then agrarian is a heavy animal-drawn plow. Women do most productive food products in horticultural societies. Men do 100% in the heavy animal-drawn plow. And nobody oppressed anybody. Women don't do it because they have much higher rates of miscarriage. It is to a woman's Darwinian advantage not to plow. Get the big dork. You've got the t-shirt that says, I'm with stupid plows. So stupid goes out and hooks up the plow and does all that kind of stuff. Dies, decade younger. Y'all got that kind of fixed in there. And then y'all are in the huts playing mahjong and God knows what. But there was no oppression. There weren't women rushing into the fields and men beating them and pushing them off and saying you're going to be. This oppression thing, it's crazy. So if you look at, let's say, horticultural, and you look at the number of practices that you have in horticultural, if you look at the percentage of tribes that have slavery, it's almost identical around the world. It's frightening how powerful the lower right is. And it governs all sorts of things in terms of practices. And incidentally, slavery appears in every known horticultural type, including foraging, hunting and gathering. Every major type, with one exception. It does not appear in industrial societies. And one of the tragedies of many tragedies of postmodernism is they blame the Western Enlightenment for things that the Western Enlightenment was halfway through curing and actually getting rid of the problem. And postmodernists, who are just horrifyingly bad historians, blame Western culture for causing these things, when Western culture has cured most of them. So every known culture around the world has slavery. In a 100-year period, every industrialized country on the face of the planet, with no exceptions, outlawed slavery. That 100-year period was from about 1770 to 1870. And it was gone. And that's an extraordinary, extraordinary accomplishment. It was a 4-quadrant affair. You have to have, if you have very powerful machines doing work on the environment that men and women used to have to do. It freed them up, and it took away the pressure to have the male body be selected to go out and do the heavy work. And that kept men in the productive sphere and women in the reproductive sphere. It kept men in the public sphere, women in the private sphere. And there are, in the public sphere, there are certainly certain advantages, but there are also advantages in the private sphere. And if you actually look, Janet Chaffez, who's my favorite feminist writer, and has done systems theory analysis of these 5 major epochs, points out that in the society, so-called patriarchal societies, that quality of life for men was much, much lower than for women, much lower. And women are starting to find this out as they're not only allowed into their workplace, but forced into it. And it's like you work all day long and you come home and you go, that's fucking freedom? You've got to be kidding me. I was playing Mahjong. Something is terribly wrong. So it's a bitch. And so that's part of what's going on, but it could only happen in industrialized cultures. But so looking at that is what gave Karl Marx the notion that, in a sense, the lower right quadrant determines everything. And in very, very famous quote, depending on how you translate it, it's not the consciousness of men and women that create their techno-economic social conditions. It's the techno-economic conditions that create their consciousness. And you can start to see how he got that idea if you look at this kind of data. But it doesn't really work, and there's all sorts of things that go on. First of all, the lower right quadrant was created by somebody in the upper left. So it was an individual idea that first got embodied and then built into a social techno-economic mode. When James Watt was walking across the Cambridge lawn and got the idea of a steam engine and conveyed that to a few people, and they eventually got it built, and the steam engine eventually turned into first being used to grind flour mills and wheat mills. And then, of course, the steam engine itself in terms of railroad. And that ushered in the Industrial Revolution. That single idea that he had probably affected more men and women than any other single idea ever. And so it's really individual ideas that still drive the planet. But it's, Winston Churchill said something like, we build our houses and then our houses build us. It's that kind of thing. We create it, and then it tends to create all subsequent generations born into it. And so that has an extraordinary, extraordinary impact. And what the informational age did was make pluralism possible. And so green and information go together. Orange and industrial goes together. Amber and agrarian arose together. Red and horticultural arose together. And so horticultural also has the highest rate of slavery. Now, these are the cultures that have the great mother goddess deities as well. So weren't they fun-loving cultures? Highest rate of human sacrifice, highest rate of slavery, highest rate of warfare. So the great goddess, those great peaceful, loving, great mother societies, not really so. You have to be careful about these things. And unfortunately, the postmodernists just don't have a grasp of history. And they don't study history. And they don't study history because historical facts are fabrications. They're no different from poetry, and we make them up in our own interpretive repertoire. So no need to study history. We can just make up our own interpretive version of it. And so book after book after book over the last 20 years came up and basically stated what yesterday was like. They didn't have bother to check. And most of the ideas are spectacularly, stunningly wrong. And we lost a generation of scholarship, unfortunately. And I really say that with some hesitation, but I've really come to conclude that you just can't get good scholarship in terms of looking at objective aspects. Other stuff we get from it is extremely important, and that is the importance of the lower left quadrant. Intersubjectivity is a component of everything that arises.